welcome to today's videos. What we're going to do today is what I'm calling a numbers challenge. It's going to be in two parts. Essentially what we're going to do is we're going to go through the TBR list and type in 1. And anything on my TBR that has the number 1 in it, we'll look at and we'll do that through the numbers 1 through 10. We'll pick out one from each category and we'll read them in order. For this first part, we're going to go ahead and select all 10 of them. In the second, we can recap. In the first part, we'll read 1 through 5, and in the second part, we will read 6 through 10. I'm going to give preference to if I have a physical copy of that number already. We're going to kind of choose to go with that just so that we're reading what we have instead of bringing stuff in without reading what we have. Let's just go first through and look at all of our options, and then we'll decide. That way we don't get all kind of in one genre and we can kind of look at what our options are. If we go through, get all the ones with the number 1 in it, we have One by One by Ruth Ware, One of Us is Dead by Geneva Rose, It Happened One Summer by Tessa Bailey, One Night on the Island by Josie Silver, The Gilded Ones, and The Merciless Ones. They're all released. However, Merciless Ones is automatically taken off strictly because we haven't read the first one, so we can't do that. For number 2, we have The Two Lives of Sarah by Catherine Adele West. Two Kingdoms. The Two Lives of Sarah is not out yet, so that automatically leaves us between Two Kingdoms. I do already have that as a digital copy, so that kind of tells that. For number 3, we have A Letter to Three Witches by Elizabeth Bass, and then Three Millers by Anna Malika Tubbs. For number 4, we have Four Aunties and a Wedding, The Four Winds and 400 Souls. For number 5, I only have one, The Central Park 5 by Sarah Burns. For number 6, Tris Six Venom by Penelope Douglas, The Atlas 6 by Olivia Blake, and then 6 Weeks to Live by Catherine McKenzie. For 7, I only have one, The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid. For 8, we only have one, 8 Perfect Murders by Peter Swanson. For 9, we have 3 options. 9 Lives by Peter Swanson, The 9 by Gwen Strauss, and 9 Liars by Marie Johnson.
The only one we have for number 10 is Woman in Cabin 10 by Ruth Ware.
What we are left with is, for number 1, we're going to read It Happened One Summer by Tessa Bailey. I'm very excited about that. We will need to get that book because I didn't have a physical copy of any of the books in 1. Again, we only have one option for 2 because 1 was not released. I already have a copy of Between Two Kingdoms, and I only have the digital copy of that. So we're going to read that one for number 2. For 3, again, didn't have a copy of either, so we could have gone either way. A Letter to Three Witches by Elizabeth Bass. I also want to take into account genres, so I'm not reading all the same authors, same genres, etc., etc. For number 4, we're going to read Kristen Hanna's The Four Winds. Central Park 5 by Sarah Burns is a nonfiction. 6 Weeks to Live by Catherine McKenzie. I have that as a digital copy. The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid. That's what we're going to read for number 7. 8 Perfect Murders by Peter Swanson. The 9, I have it as a digital copy by Gwen Strauss. Number 10, The Woman in Cabin 10 by Ruth Ware. It looks like we're going to have 4 romance, 2 nonfiction, 1 memoir, and then 3 mystery thrillers.
We're going to start with number 1 for the challenge, It Happened One Summer by Tessa Bailey. This is a romance about a girl who's kind of an influencer who goes to a small fishing town and then falls in love with a burly fisherman. We've started this, and all that's happened so far of this is she got dumped, so she kind of made some silly choices, kind of broke the law, got arrested, and then they bailed her out, and kind of to make penance for her actions, she sent away to where she was born in a small little fishing town, which she doesn't really know much about. So far so good. This is the first Tessa Bailey I've ever read, and I've heard she can be the queen of smut or just really good at writing smut. So I'm curious about that. I tend to like books that are very slow burn and builds up to it. So I'm curious to see. I don't know if this is going to be a slow burn or not. So we've started this, and this is just the first one of the challenge. We have finished the first book of the challenge. It Happened One Summer by Tessa Bailey. We're going to give this a 3.5, borderline of 4. So the reason for that being, because it's a good book, a good storyline. It's not too just like outrageously ridiculous. It's a, you know, the characters are cute. The romance portion of it, the smut scenes, they're there. They're good. The reason this is lower for me, so one, romance is not one of the genres that I tend to get as invested in, as excited in. Also, the romance that I tend to find the chemistry between the characters more exciting, and just story is like really slow burn ones I can think of, like Birthday Girl by Penelope Douglas, Colty, The Wall of Winnipeg and Me. So those would be like, when I think of romance, the kind of romance that I like. They're slower burns. This has those elements, and I liked it, and I love the premise of the little small town and all of that. But for me, I love the slow burn of romance. So, very good book. Highly recommend. Just as far as like what gets me excited in romance, this wasn't quite there. However, I had a wonderful time with it. And that's why I'm giving it a 3.5, borderline of 4. The next book is number 2, which is Between Two Kingdoms. And I have a Kindle version of that, so I don't have like a physical copy. That one is a memoir about a young woman who got diagnosed with leukemia at a very young age. Very different from the one we just read. I'm very curious to read the book, but also it's one of those books you know is going to be sad. And sad in the sense you can't be like, well, at least the character's not real. This is a real person's life, and even though you know they survived because they wrote a book, it's still going to be an emotional ride. And so it's one that's been on my radar, and I've been kind of putting it off for that reason. So I'm glad that this challenge is coming so that it kind of forces me to read that book. But once I get into that book, we will give you an update. So I'll see you in a little bit. We finished Between Two Kingdoms by Salika Jawad. This is a memoir of somebody's experience with leukemia. I'm not going to give it a rating just because you can't rate that stuff in my opinion. But it was an extremely emotional story. It's somebody's real life. And even though obviously she lived to write the book, it's still emotional when you're learning about her diagnosis, when you're learning about the experiences that she went through. It was also kind of eye-opening to see it from her point of view, like some of the interactions that she would have with people in relation to her cancer. It's kind of a good way you could maybe take some of that if you're in a situation where, you know, you're not the one with cancer, but somebody who maybe needs to deal, somebody who's going through that situation, you can see it from somebody else's point of view, because she definitely talked about a lot of that stuff. So it was an extremely emotional story, well written. You know, it's obviously a life, so it's slower paced, which fit that story. I was gonna go back between Audible and the digital copy. However, the audio version is actually narrated by her. It had even more impact, so I ended up listening the majority of it on audio versus reading. Next book will be A Letter to Three Witches, which I went ahead and ordered a copy, and it's not quite here. It's supposed to be here any day. I finally got my copy of A Letter to Three Witches by Elizabeth Bass. So I've started this. I'm only like a quarter of the way through. Let me just tell you what it's about really fast, and then I'll tell you about kind of where we're at in the story. This woman's family has been cursed and is not allowed to do magic even though they're magical due to something that happened that like their great-great-grandfather did. And so they're not allowed to practice magic, and because that they have like watchers who like watch them and they can curse them. She owns like this handyman like a shop called Abracadabra. What has happened so far? A set of cousins who get a letter from Gwen, Trudy, and Milo. Yeah, Gwen, Trudy, and Milo, who receive a letter from their other cousin Tanith, who's like, I'm moving to Manhattan, and on Friday one of your significant others is coming with me, but she doesn't say which one. So they're all kind of like suspicious about which one's going to be. And that's kind of what it starts with. It starts off from the viewpoint of Grizz, which is Tanith's familiar. But so far, that's really the only insertion of from like the familiar's viewpoint, which kind of helps you get Tanith's viewpoint. However, I'm only a quarter of the way through. I wouldn't say I'm really enjoying it. The characters, the story, it's seeming a little slow, a little redundant, but we have started it and we will see how it goes. We finished A Letter to Three Wishes by Elizabeth Bass, 2 stars. I didn't enjoy the book. So it felt very one-dimensional. There wasn't good chemistry between the characters. You didn't get invested in the characters. There wasn't a lot going on. Some of the situations they got in were just ridiculous. They weren't funny in a rom-com sense. They were just silly. I didn't like this. One of the things that I think could have made it better, so there was the point of view of Gwen, the main character, and then there was also the point of view of a cat named Grizz, who was the familiar of one of the characters. Only you got it in the very beginning, you got it in the end, and you got it like one or twice or 2 or 3 times in between. So there wasn't enough dimension of like other point of views, characters, and situations to add depth to the story. So I think what could have been better is if there was more points of view from Grizz, the familiar's point of view, to just add some more, just a little bit something more to the story. Next one for the challenge is Four Winds by Christina Hand. This is a historical fiction. This is about a woman who she was always told like she couldn't get married, she was ugly, she wasn't healthy, she was too old, all these reasons why she can't and won't get married. So she just kind of strikes out, meets a guy, they end up getting married, having 2 children, and then they live in the Great Plains, and then the Dust Bowl happens and that whole experience. So I will give an update on this next. Look at that. We finished The Four Winds by Kristen Hanna. This was a 3.5 for me. So what kind of bumped it from a 3 to a 3.5 was the ending, which I'm not going to spoil. It was a great story, well written, as far as character development, plot wise. It was a little bit slower paced, which is pretty typical for, in my opinion, for historical fiction. I can definitely understand why this is such a popular book and why my rating is lower, is because I don't typically do historical fiction. And one of the things that bumped it up is what I would consider is, like, you know what's going to happen. However, there were points in this where what you would think would happen, given the fact that it's a book, I don't want to spoil anything, it doesn't go the way that you would anticipate, which I think brought this up and helped me be invested in it. However, it just was too slow paced. It felt like they were kind of going through the same things, but I understand why it was written there. So I did enjoy this. I was traveling, so I got to listen to this a lot in the audiobook, and also I was not driving, so I could read the book. So that's why I'm not going to have a bunch of updates on this particular book. But overall, it was a good book, 3.5. I would definitely recommend it. The next book I only have is an ebook, The Central Park 5, which is a story about 5 teenagers who were charged with the attempted murder and rape of a jogger in Central Park, and it's called the Central Park Jogger. They refer to her as the Central Park Jogger, and that's why it's called the Central Park 5. Just kind of the injustice of that, because they were later released. The charges were revoked, so I'm curious to see that story. It's definitely been on my radar for a long time. I believe it was The Daily Show many years ago that kind of discussed this topic in this book, which is how this got on my radar. Another book, Central Park 5, on the way up here. Another slower book, nonfiction. That one did a lot of talking about stuff. Great story. Definitely needs more like knowledge about it, because even though they dropped the charges, and I don't mean to be spoily, but potential spoiler alert, but we all know they were obviously let go of the charges, but even though they let go of the charges, they're still affected by it. And they were never, like, you can't give that justice back or give that time back to those kids. So, like, thinking from that point of view, like, these people's lives were, like, irreversibly just destroyed. Like, even if they are like, okay, now you're not guilty, like, it's going to affect them forever. And not only that, but, like, they missed out on, like, times in their lives and opportunities they could have had. And it's going to have effect on them. It's going to have effect on their kids. Like, it's a lasting effect on more than even just them, but, like, their families, all of that stuff. So, and one of them's, one of their parents passed away while they were in jail, and, like, really couldn't be there through their struggle. And, I mean, that was just heartbreaking. And obviously, hindsight's always 20/20, but, like, reading this, it's like, no, they didn't do it at all right. Like, they were just like, no, we're going to make it these people, and we're going to, like, sit there, and we're going to make it happen. And it was just... it was awful, but yeah, another extremely impactful story. That's the end of the first part of the numbers challenge. I had so much fun doing this. We will come out with the second part here soon. I think I'm going to do some other challenges next month, so stay tuned for those. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one. See ya.